What is the point of language? This is a question I hear more and more often these days. What's the point of learning French, Spanish, or Mandarin? We can all speak English and understand each other just fine, right? So what even is the point of having all these languages? Well, if you classify language purely as a way to tell other people things, then there wouldn't be much of a point. Yet there must be a point, or why else would we dedicate so much time and so much effort to learning these obscure words and these inane grammar structures? Tonight, I'll attempt to give you my very best answer to that question. For me, to answer that question, we must first dive into the roots of language, how language is created, how they formed, and how they shaped. So for me, I believe that languages are ultimately created and shaped by the cultures that use them. Indeed, words are created and popularized to represent things, ideas, emotions, and concepts that are important to certain groups of people. And those words, although oftentimes similar, due to the regularity of the human condition, are fundamentally untranslatable. I'm sure the bilinguals and the trilinguals in the crowd can relate to this notion. I mean, we got some time, so might as well, let's have a look. Raise your hand if you speak at least 2 languages. Okay, so most of the people here, I mean, I expected as much. So now keep your hand up, keep your hand up if you speak at least 3. Okay, still quite a few. And now keep your hand up if you speak more than 3. Yeah, this is where I expected to see the biggest drop off, but there's still quite a few. So, as I'm sure quite a few of you can relate then, it can sometimes be quite difficult to try and translate a word, or even to try and explain its meaning to someone who doesn't speak that language. In fact, I've gathered a list of some of these special words here, and I would like to share it with you all tonight. So, just keep in mind that while some of these words are from languages I speak, others aren't, so forgive me in advance for possibly butchering the pronunciation on some of these. But I'll give it my best shot. Here we go. So this first one is saudade, which is in Portuguese, and it means the longing for something beautiful that's now gone. Now I speak Portuguese, and even I'm not quite sure I fully agree with this definition. But that's kind of the whole point of this exercise, right? So let's keep going. This one's a little bit harder, but I'll give it my best shot. Hireth, in Welsh. The feeling of homesickness combined with grief and sadness for your homeland or romanticized past. The object of your hireth isn't attainable or perhaps never existed at all. This next one I'm kind of just doing for your own entertainment because I'm almost certain that I'll completely mess it up. Glugavur, in Icelandic, weather that looks beautiful but isn't pleasant to be in. And then I thought I'd give myself an easy way out with this one. So it's won in Korean, which is the reluctance to let go of an illusion. Now, for quite a few, if not all of these words, I'm sure most of you guys got the basic meaning of what they mean through these descriptions. But just by listening to them, you can tell that they don't truly encapsulate what these words mean. And so, I would like to, now that I've shown you the profound roots language have in culture, I would like to make that more obvious through an example. So let's take languages that are non-traditional, that are very contrasting to our English language. Let's take the Gugu Yimitir language, spoken by an Aboriginal tribe of the same name in Australia. Now in this language, they don't use egocentric directions like right, left, forwards, and backwards. Rather, they prefer to use geographical directions, such as east, west, north, and south. And so, linguists think that a possible reason for that difference is the need to navigate themselves in the natural world. Now, some of you guys, I bet, could argue that, I don't see how this is that big of a difference. You can navigate the natural world just fine using your right and your left, and besides, we have north, south, east, and west in English anyway, so how significant of a difference can this be? Well, I'll try and show you that tonight. Let's take a map of Singapore. I reckon that most of you in the audience could probably pinpoint where we are on that map and could probably tell me how to get to your house using that map. You would tell me, first you go left, and then you go up, and then you go right, and then eventually we'd make it there. However, you take away that map, And all of a sudden, this task becomes much harder, because then our left and our right doesn't align with these cardinal directions. And I'd wager, if I was a betting man, that if I asked most of you here to point towards the direction of your home, most of you would struggle to do that. And in fact, I tried this little experiment on myself, and I searched up where the cardinal directions would be when I was standing right here. And I now know that east is somewhere that way, west is vaguely in that direction, and I can confidently say that if I were to walk in a straight line that way, I would eventually make it back home. Now I'd have to learn to walk on water, but eventually I'd get there. So what's the point I'm trying to put across here? It's that right now I can visualize my position relative to all of Singapore. I can even visualize it relative to the whole world. I know where I'm standing, I know what direction I'm looking at. This is something that most of you in the audience are currently incapable of. Imagine that difference in thinking for your entire lifetime, how that shapes the way you view the world. So I'm sure some of you could still argue that, that's a very niche example, right? It's an Aboriginal tribe in Australia. You don't come across those every day. But there are far less extreme examples of this in all cultures around the world. Take, for example, cultures that have grammatical rules to show respect to elders or figures of authority, like, Korean or Vietnamese. Even in my own language, we have a different pronoun when we want to show respect to someone. Whereas in English, you're just kind of confined to the use of you. And so what this shows is that you don't need necessity to shape a language. Language can be shaped just to suit the cultural norms of a certain culture. And so now I think I've done a reasonably good job of arguing how and why language is shaped by culture. But how does that help me prove my point that there's still worth to learning languages today? Well, in order to do that, I'm going to have to dive into a little anecdote. Whilst I am French, I grew up for the majority of my formative years in Brazil, where I studied in an American school. That means I grew up effectively speaking 3 languages, one at home, one at school, and one with my friends. And I loved it in Brazil. It was great. It's a photo of me and my family in Brazil at the beach. It was great, but like all great things, it eventually came to an end. And when I was 12, I had to move to the Netherlands. And you could be forgiven for thinking that I would be at ease and quickly fit in a European country just like my very own. You could even be forgiven for thinking that it would be very culturally similar to its close neighbor, France. But you couldn't be more wrong. During the time I was there, I was constantly perplexed by the Dutch people and their way of life. Frankly, I felt like a stranger the whole time, and I hated the year I spent there. I mean, can you blame me? This is a photo of my family at the beach in Brazil. This is a year later, I was at the beach again in the Netherlands. It's a lot less fun, I'll tell you that. And my dad is fine, by the way. He's not in this photo because he's taking it. Nothing happened to him. In fact, the Netherlands was so depressing for me that I took up running, a hobby some consider to be a form of self-harm. So, it wasn't great, is my point. But what makes this sob story much more interesting, though, is when me and my family went to a short trip in Spain, not long after a little stint in the Netherlands. Despite never living in Spain and only knowing the very, very basics of the Spanish language, I instantly felt at home. Much more than I'd ever felt in the year I spent in the Netherlands. And perhaps not coincidentally, Spanish is French and Portuguese just kind of like fused into one. Now, I'm not a tenured professor in linguistics, so, my opinion might not be as valid as some of you might consider, but, this is the conclusion I came to from my personal experience. And whilst the epiphanies I had on linguistics as a middle schooler are very much up for debate, what remains an indisputable fact is that Portuguese, French, and Spanish are all Romance languages, whereas Dutch is a Germanic language. Now, for those in the audience who aren't aware, languages are often grouped into linguistic families, where it's groups where languages have similar linguistic traits. So Romance languages is one of those families, and Germanic languages is another one of those families. And so the insight that this gave me was that people who share language, who share linguistic family, or just languages that share linguistic traits in general, are more likely to understand each other. They're more likely to think the same way, value the same things, have similar cultures, and feel at home in each other's cultures. But is this actually true? Well, let's have a look at some maps. This is a map of the spread of Romance languages in Europe, where the darker blue areas represent places where those languages are more present, they have a more significant presence. And the light blue represent where they're perhaps less present. And the gray, well, nowadays everyone speaks a little bit of everything everywhere, but the gray represents where historically there has been little to no presence of Romance languages. And so I really want you guys to take in the shape of this graph and really kind of try and not memorize it, but get a feel for the overall shape of it, because this is going to be important moving forward. This next graph is a graph of religious diversity in Europe. The blue area representing Catholic Christianity, the purple above it representing Protestant Christianity, and the bit on the right in red representing Orthodox Christianity. Now, what I'm sure some of you may have already realized is that the blue area sort of resembles the spread of Romance languages we saw earlier. I mean, maybe apart from that little bit around Greece and the south of Eastern Europe, it would be almost exactly the same graph. Now, is this a coincidence? Maybe, but let's look at a few more maps. This one is my favorite, actually. It's potato Europe against tomato Europe. So, it's pretty intuitive. It describes areas of Europe that prefer to use potatoes in their diet versus areas of Europe that prefer to use tomatoes in their diet. But we can see that once again, the red area feels sort of familiar. It's not as closely related as perhaps the other map, but you can definitely see some sort of correlation between the red area and the spread of Romance languages. Anyway, we have some more graphs, or maps. This one's pretty similar. It's pretty important as well. It's sunlight. I love the sun. So we see the areas in yellow where, it's sunnier throughout the year, and the areas in gray are perhaps where it's cloudier on average. And so some of you are probably starting to tune out and think, these graphs are a little bit silly. He's just trying to, find whatever data he can to support his point. And, you'd be right. But before you tune out, I would just like to reveal my source for some of these. So I've been getting these graphs, well, not all of them, but some, from the Atlas of Prejudice, which breaks down Europe into 20 different stereotypes. So yes, some of them are quite silly, but as I'm sure some of you have guessed, the point of these graphs is to show the irony in breaking down such a complex and fascinating continent as Europe into a few basic stereotypes. Despite that, however, I do feel that these maps do a relatively good job at showing legitimate cultural divides, if only in a much broader sense. Because after all, stereotypes, as ignorant as they may be, always stem from something. And so, pretend that you believe me for a second. Pretend that you actually believe that a shared language or shared linguistic traits can help you relate to someone, can help you see the world the way they see it, help you relate to them. Pretend you believe that. Think about how crazy that would be just for 1 second. Just work with me. People across the world from you, living wildly different things, can relate to you just by speaking the same language, or even just something vaguely similar. So what's the point I'm trying to get at here? Well, the point I'm trying to make is that the point of languages isn't to just understand the words that come out of each other's mouths. It's to understand the way we think. It's to understand the way we behave, what we value and what we don't. And when we understand these things, we come closer to understanding each other as human beings. We become better at communicating and at collaborating. In fact, I truly believe that there are very few things you can do to humanize a group of people beyond learning their language, because it just shows you so much about who they are. This concept isn't anything new, though. Nelson Mandela said a long time before me if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to a man in his language, that goes to his heart. So what's my conclusion here? Am I saying that the key to world peace is making everyone polyglots? A world full of little linguistic geniuses? I mean, yeah, I kind of am. And besides, there are over 7,000 languages out there, and we all stubbornly stick to English. Like, how boring is that? So, do me a favor, go out there and create that Duolingo account. Book that next lesson and learn that next language. Stop procrastinating. Become the polyglots you, or at the very least I, definitely want to see in this world. And with all that said, thank you for coming to my TED Talk.